Well, this is one of those biblical scenes that I really enjoy. I enjoy lots of them, but I enjoy it because it's such an unusual story, and I've got way more questions than answers. Um, why would Jesus be talking to Moses and Elijah? Do Moses and Elijah make a habit of showing up places? I've been up a couple of mountains, and I've never once seen them. um, Jesus would sometimes go by himself to pray up the mountain. Did they show up then too? I've got so many questions. How did Peter know it was Moses and Elijah? Were they wearing, I'm not wearing my name tag today, but maybe they were. Or did they say, hey, Jesus, it's us, Elijah and Moses? That's just the surface of all the crazy questions I have about this passage that I cannot answer. But I thought I would just throw them out there for all of you. In case some of you have some insights that I don't have, I'd be welcome to hear from you. So I'm not always exactly what to make of this passage. Or how the three disciples figured out what to make of this event. However, they knew that Moses and Elijah were there with Jesus. I think we understand the meanings of what they represent. The law, Moses bringing the law from God up a mountain, his face shone when he returned from the mountain. And Elijah represents the prophets. And there were traditions that neither of them had never died. There's, of course, a connection between Jesus and the law and the prophets, connecting the old with the new. Also a continuation of the law and what the prophets had prophesied. Another thing that I like about this passage is it's another one of those passages where I often try to imagine how I would respond in these situations. But this is one of those where I can't even begin to guess how I would respond if I were Peter or the sons of Zebedee. I can picture all sorts of options. I could see myself screaming and running away. That's a real option I think I could have done. I can picture myself just standing completely frozen and dumbfounded. At least Peter has already seen some amazing things firsthand, up close and personal with Jesus. But I doubt this is what he expected on this trip up the mountain today. But maybe by now he's used to seeing unexplainable things, because he has seen many unexplainable things already. So Peter, I think, responds better than I would have. Peter then said to Jesus, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will set up 3 tents here, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. I will build 3 tents or 3 booths. Could be a temporary shelter. It could mean tabernacle as a worship place, the dwelling place of God in the Old Testament. It can mean house, a permanent dwelling. Which brings up more questions that I can't answer. Why would these 3 need a house or a dwelling place? I don't know. Peter certainly seems unsure what to make of this situation. So maybe he's just spouting out ideas. workshopping with Moses and Elijah and Jesus on what to do. I can certainly admire his desire to want to do something in this situation, but I think it's clear he doesn't know what to do. Peter may be attempting to preserve this time or prolong it, make it last a little longer. After all, there is trouble for them when they come down the mountain. And Luke tells us that this trouble, the departure of Jesus, is what waits for. Matthew doesn't tell us what they're talking about. But in Luke we are told, "And behold, two men were talking with him, and they were Moses and Elijah, who appearing in glory were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem." Luke added that tidbit for us, but Matthew did not. And Mark also adds a caveat about Peter when he offers to build these tents or booths. They throw in a little line, Mark 9:6, "For he did not know what he was saying, for they were terrified." I think that's a good bit to remember. Jesus doesn't seem to have normal trips up the mountain. I guess anywhere. Jesus doesn't have any normal trips, but especially up the mountain. A couple of weeks ago, we had a Jesus mountain experience where he was tempted by the devil. The devil took Jesus to a very high mountain, showed him all the kingdoms in the world and their splendor, and offered them to Jesus. Could there have been a similar temptation in this mountaintop experience? Was Peter perhaps tempting Jesus to stay on this mountain, to stay with all his glory and splendor rather than come down? Could that be the reason Peter wants to build tents or booths, to capture this glorious moment and also to avoid the painful ones to come? While Peter is trying to come up with something, God interrupts. Verse 5, while he was still speaking, while Peter was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." While Peter was speaking, God interrupts. God coming in a bright cloud. I mean, if there was ever a time to feel real small, I think it's when God stops you and says, "Why don't you just sit down and be quiet? You don't know what's going on here, Peter. Listen." When God tells you to just be quiet, I don't know, that feels like, oh, sorry, God, I'll listen now. Of course, this is my son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased. We know these verses from Jesus' baptism. And we know this from God saying them to Jesus at Jesus' baptism. Why is God pleased with Jesus? At the baptism, it comes from Jesus' desire to fulfill all righteousness. And at the transfiguration, this righteousness is more clearly defined by Jesus, with passion predictions already happening. That Jesus is on the path of righteousness, which leads him to death. Doing what God requires, righteousness, is more important than Jesus' own life. And with that, God is well pleased. So God tells Peter and also James and John to listen. And this listen is a present imperative, which implies a continual or repeated actions. Could be said, keep on listening to Jesus, or continue to listen to Jesus. Now, since I'm kind of been jumping around the Bible, we don't always get the context of where we're at. But in chapter 16, Peter has just given the great confession about who Jesus is. Who do you say I am, Peter? Well, you are the Messiah sent by God. That is the foundation that Jesus wants to build upon. But then a couple of verses later, Peter proves he doesn't always get it. 16, verses 21 through 23. From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed on the third day, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, God, I forbid it. This must never happen to you. The disciples, or Peter especially, was unable to hear this first passion prediction. Peter rebukes Jesus for saying such words. And Peter's problem, as Jesus indicates, that you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. The same problem might be evident in his desire to build these 3 tents. If Jesus was speaking to Moses and Elijah about his upcoming death, perhaps Peter wants to keep thinking humanly and stay up on the mountain a little longer. Peter has shown he doesn't want Jesus to die. Why would he want Jesus to die? He doesn't want to lose God with him, with us, Emmanuel. And I doubt that has changed in one chapter. Peter hears them talking about Jesus' upcoming departure and wants to prolong it as much as possible. Peter has made a good confession, and Jesus declared that, "Blessed are you, Simon, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but God in heaven has." God had revealed to Peter who Jesus is, the Messiah, the Son of the living God. But this revelation doesn't help Peter understand what will happen to Jesus. He will suffer, die, and be raised. Peter rebukes him, and Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." Jesus wants him to think bigger, think broader. Yes, it's nice to have Jesus here with you, but I could be with many others and do for many others and not just you. In the Transfiguration, God has revealed to Peter and the sons of Zebedee who Jesus is, the glorified, beloved Son of God, and God is pleased. But this revelation doesn't help Peter understand what he needs to do. He wants to do something. He needs to do something. He wants to build tents. And God says, listen. Peter, the first time Jesus said he must die and be raised, Peter says no. And I wonder if he even heard the whole part of what Jesus said. And be raised. It's hard to look past the part where Jesus says he must die. It must be hard to hear that. It is hard to hear that when people we know and love say that they're dying. It's never easy. But it's certainly not easy when it's Jesus, sent by God, the Messiah. As Jesus talks, I wonder if Peter and the rest of the disciples didn't hear the resurrection part. Even after the events of Good Friday where Jesus dies, it seems that the disciples weren't expecting a resurrection. They have difficulties hearing and believing these words. Therefore, God comes to them and says, listen. There are times to do work, and there are times to sit and listen, especially when it's a hard reality to hear. That Jesus will die. The one you love is going to die. Jesus' time is growing short. The disciples do not get a choice in that. And very soon there will be lots to do. But for now, they're in their last moments with Jesus, and God says, listen. His death is coming regardless if the disciples are ready or not. And Jesus wants them to be ready. God comes in this cloud. Being that close to God, hearing the voice from the cloud produced more fear. So much fear that the disciples literally fell on their faces. That could be a posture of worship, but it is clearly stated that it represents fear. And in this fear, what does Jesus do? He comes to them, touches them, an act that often represents healing throughout the New Testament, and tells them to get up or be raised. Often some words Jesus says after healing those. Take up your mat and go. They didn't have a mat this time. But it's no longer the glowing Jesus, the glorified Jesus. It is the down-to-earth human Jesus who comes and touches them and speaks to the disciples. The disciples are transformed from their fear and their anxiousness in that moment. How great it must have been to have the loving and changing hand of Jesus on their shoulder. What are we afraid of? I've got fears. What are you afraid of? Are these fears that we have, do they draw us closer to God, or do they prevent us from hearing God's words? What do we need to be changed in? How do we need to be transformed and transfigured? In chapter 5 of Matthew, called the Sermon on the Mount, where Elijah and Moses didn't show, as far as I know, the church is pictured as a city lit up, shining on a hill. Those who have been transformed are enlightened by Jesus. But they know they need to come down from this hill to be the human presence of Jesus, to fearful people, offering the touch of new life to help the fearful stand tall. Transfiguration story reminds me that I need regular encounters with God. And in those encounters, I need to listen. And I need to confess that I don't always know what to do. Perhaps we are to confess that we are scared at times to follow the unknown path in front of us. Perhaps part of what Peter was afraid of in Jesus' path to death was that Jesus said, you're going to be following him. Perhaps Peter was more afraid of his own loss that could come. So as we are still in our time of Lent, in our journey to the cross, may we, it's very important to go and do, but may we also stop and listen. Because we also need Jesus' touch to calm our fears, to speak to us, so that with that encounter we continue to be transformed and can continue to share the light of Jesus that dwells within us. And now I'm going to invite you all to pray. And we're going to just take a moment to pray silently so that we can stop and listen. Let us pray.